On this board, we're talking about the Fair Housing Act. Now, what is the history behind the Fair Housing Act? Well, it started all the way back in 1866. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 prohibits public and private racial discrimination in any property transaction in the United States. The Civil Rights Act was later amended to Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 and is now commonly called the Fair Housing Act. Now, what is the purpose of the Fair Housing Act? The purpose of the Fair Housing Act is to prohibit discrimination in the sale or lease of residential property, including vacant land intended for residential housing. What are the protected classes of the Fair Housing Act? There are 7 protected classes: sex, race, religion, color, national origin, disability, and familiar status. Now, what does familiar status mean? What is that? What is familiar status? Basically, familiar status is having children in your household whom you have legal custody of. Now, what are some examples of discrimination that the Fair Housing Act prohibits? What are examples of discrimination that is prohibited by the Fair Housing Act? Well, one is blockbusting, also known as panic selling. Now, what is blockbusting? What is panic selling? Blockbusting, panic selling, is trying to induce owners to sell their homes by suggesting that the ethnic or racial composition of the neighborhood is changing, with the implication that property values will decline due to this change. Now, another example of discrimination that is prohibited is steering. Steering. Now, what is steering? Steering is channeling prospective real estate buyers or tenants towards or away from particular neighborhoods based on their race. Now, what is redlining? Because redlining is another form of discrimination that is prohibited by the Fair Housing Act. And so what is redlining? Redlining is refusal to make loans on property located in a particular neighborhood for discriminatory reasons. Now, side note, to combat redlining, the Community Reinvestment Act, the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA, was enacted to reduce discriminatory credit practices against low-income neighborhoods. The CRA is designed to help meet the credit needs of the community. Now, another side note is this: concerns about redlining also prompted the passage of the HMDA law. What is HMDA? What does HMDA stand for? HMDA is Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. So concerns about redlining also prompted the passage of the HMDA law. HMDA requires lenders to file reports and maintain a log based on the race, ethnicity, and sex of every applicant that applies for a home loan. The HMDA law, HMDA is designed to meet the housing needs of the community. So check this out. CRA, right? Community Reinvestment Act, that's designed to meet the credit needs of the community. And HMDA is designed to meet the housing needs of the community. So a little distinction right there. Now, what are some other examples of discrimination that is prohibited by the Fair Housing Act? Well, another thing that's prohibited is refusing to rent or sell property after receiving a bona fide offer. right? Now, by the way, what does bona fide mean? What is a bona fide offer? What does bona fide mean? Well, you look at even like the Latin origin of the word bona fide. It means good faith, right? Good faith, a good faith offer, right? A sincere, true offer. So refusing to rent or sell property after receiving a bona fide offer, that is a form of discrimination that is prohibited under the Fair Housing Act. Also, another example is changing the terms of a sale or lease for different potential buyers, right? We can't do that. We can't have different terms for different types of buyers, right? That's based on, discriminatory reasons, right? So we can't do that. Now, also using advertising that indicates a preference or an intent to discriminate. Also, representing that a property is not available for inspection, sale, or rent when it is available, right? So all these things are examples of discrimination that is prohibited under the Fair Housing Act. Now, what about exemptions though? There are exemptions to the Fair Housing Act, all right? So for example, it is not a violation. It is not a violation to refuse rental of a room or unit in a dwelling with no more than 4 independent units, provided that the owner occupies 1 unit as a residence. Also, another exemption is a single-family home is sold or rented by a private owner without the use of a broker. Also, another exemption is housing operated by organizations. And also another exemption is housing operated by private clubs. So these are exemptions of the Fair Housing Act. Now, what are the advertising rules regarding the Fair Housing Act? Well, lenders are required to include equal housing lender slogan in any broadcast advertisement and display the equal housing opportunity logo on any printed and promotional material. Now, what are the fair housing complaints process? What's the process to file a fair housing complaint? Well, a written complaint may be filed with HUD. Now, what is HUD? What does HUD stand for? That's the Housing and Urban Development, right? Housing and Urban Development. A written complaint may be filed with HUD office within 1 year of violation. So, the Fair Housing Act, the purpose to prohibit discrimination in the sale or lease of residential property, including vacant land intended for residential housing. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the chat box below, and I'll see you next time on the next episode.